Hey everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. And today we're going to be talking about listening.
Ooh.
Listening.
Yeah. It's funny because we talk so much about how to communicate better and all that stuff, but we rarely talk about the other side of that coin, actually listening.
Right.
So we're going to be deep diving into a book called You're Not Listening by Kate Murphy.
Oh, I love that title.
It's so good, right? And it's so true.
Yeah.
So many times I feel like people just aren't really listening. They're waiting for their turn to talk, or they're just completely zoned out.
It's like they're just waiting for that little pause.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like they're just waiting for a chance to jump in with their own story or opinion.
Right. Which kind of defeats the whole purpose of a conversation, doesn't it?
It totally does. I mean, what's the point of talking if nobody's actually listening? So in this deep dive, we're going to be exploring why listening is so important, what gets in the way of us being good listeners, and most importantly, some practical tips for actually improving our listening skills.
I love it. I'm ready to learn how to actually listen. So let's dive right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so first things first. Why is listening so important? I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but I think it's worth really digging into this.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate just how powerful listening can be.
Exactly. And Kate Murphy really drives this point home in her book. She talks about how good listening can improve our relationships, boost our careers, and even make us happier and healthier.
It's true. When we feel truly listened to, it makes us feel seen, valued, understood.
Yeah, it's like a basic human need, right? To feel heard and understood.
Absolutely. And when that need isn't met, it can have a real impact on our well-being.
Totally. So how about we jump into some of the things that get in the way of us being good listeners?
Sure. I think one of the biggest obstacles is our own internal noise. All those thoughts and distractions that are constantly swirling around in our heads.
Oh my gosh, yes. Especially in today's world.
Right.
We're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation.
Exactly. It's like our brains are on overdrive. And it's really hard to focus on what someone else is saying when we've got all this other stuff going on in our own minds.
So true. I know I'm definitely guilty of this. I'll be talking to someone and my mind will start wandering to my to-do list or what I'm going to have for dinner.
Yeah, or you'll be scrolling through your phone while someone's trying to have a conversation with you.
Oh yeah, totally guilty as charged. But it, it's not just technology, right? Sometimes we get so caught up in our own thoughts and feelings that we just completely tune out what the other person is saying.
Absolutely. And Murphy talks about this in her book. She calls it the closeness communication bias.
Closeness communication bias. What's that?
It's the idea that we often assume we know what our loved ones are going to say, so we don't really listen to them.
Oh, wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
And probably so true,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we think we know our partners or our best friends so well that we don't even bother to really pay attention to what they're saying.
Yeah. And the ironic thing is that Murphy found that people often find it easier to confide in strangers.
Really? Why is that?
Well, for one thing, there's no pre-existing baggage with a stranger.
Right?
You don't have to worry about judgment or past conflicts.
That makes sense. It's like you can just be yourself without all the expectations and assumptions.
Exactly. And that can create a space for real connection and vulnerability.
That's fascinating. So I guess the challenge is to bring that same level of openness and curiosity to our conversations with the people we're closest to.
Right. To really listen to them as if we're hearing them for the first time.
Yeah, that's a great point. But it's not just about avoiding distractions or being open-minded.
Right.
There are also some actual skills involved in being a good listener.
Definitely. And one of the most important skills is the art of asking good questions.
Asking questions. How does that help with listening?
Well, think about it. When you ask someone a thoughtful question, it shows that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say.
And it encourages them to elaborate and share more.
Right. Exactly. It's like you're saying, tell me more. I want to understand your perspective.
Okay, so what are some examples of good questions to ask?
Well, it depends on the situation, of course.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, open-ended questions are best.
Okay, so instead of asking, did you have a good day? I could ask, what was the best part of your day?
Exactly. Or instead of saying, that sounds tough, you could ask, how did that make you feel?
Right. So it's about asking questions that invite the other person to open up and share their thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. And when you do that, it creates a much deeper level of connection and understanding.
Makes sense. But it's funny. When I think about really good listeners, I often think about people who are actually pretty quiet.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, I think it's because they're not constantly interrupting or trying to dominate the conversation. They're just present and attentive.
That's a great observation. And Murphy talks about the importance of silence and listening. She says that many of us are actually afraid of silence in conversations.
Really? Why would we be afraid of silence?
Well, I think it's because we're so conditioned to fill every empty space with words.
Yeah, it's like we're uncomfortable with those pauses and lulls in the conversation.
Exactly. But Murphy argues that those moments of silence are actually crucial for good listening.
How so?
Well, for one thing, they give the speaker time to gather their thoughts and articulate what they want to say.
Right. And it gives the listener time to process what they've heard.
Exactly. And it also creates a space for deeper reflection and connection.
Interesting. So I guess the takeaway here is that we should embrace those moments of silence instead of trying to fill them up with words.
Absolutely. Silence can be a powerful tool for listening and understanding.
I love that.
You know, last time we were talking about all the reasons why people don't really listen.
Like all those distractions and assumptions we bring to conversations.
Right. And we touched on how we sometimes listen better to strangers than to the people closest to us.
That closeness communication bias thing
Yeah.
really got me thinking.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept, right? Because you'd think we'd be better at listening to those we know and love.
You'd think so. But Murphy argues that we often fall into these patterns of assuming we know what they'll say or how they'll react,
So we stop really paying attention, we tune them out.
and then we miss those subtle shifts, those changes in their thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. It's like we're stuck with this outdated image of them in our heads.
And we miss out on who they're becoming.
Right. So this part of our deep dive, let's focus on how to break free from those assumptions and really listen to our loved ones.
It's like hitting the refresh button on those relationships,
Right.
seeing them with fresh eyes and ears.
Exactly. And a big part of that is letting go of labels and categories.
You mean not boxing people in based on their gender or their job or even shared experiences?
Precisely. Because those labels can limit our understanding of who they truly are,
It's about recognizing the unique individual in front of us.
with their own set of thoughts, feelings, experiences.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? Do we schedule deep listening sessions with our loved ones?
It doesn't have to be that formal. It's more about cultivating a mindset of genuine curiosity.
Like approaching every conversation as an opportunity to learn something new about them.
Exactly. Even if you've been together for years, there's always more to discover.
So how do we put that curiosity into practice?
Next time your partner or a close friend is sharing something, resist the urge to interrupt or offer advice.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm a chronic advice giver.
I hear you. We all do it. But try this instead. Really focus on absorbing what they're saying.
Like giving them our undivided attention.
Exactly. Pay attention to their tone of voice, their body language, what they emphasize, and what they leave unsaid.
It's like becoming a detective of their inner world.
Exactly. You're trying to understand not just their words, but the emotions behind them.
Okay, I can see how that would require a lot of focus and attention.
It does.
Hmm.
But it's worth the effort. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply ask an open-ended question.
Like, what was that experience like for you?
Exactly. Or how did that make you feel? Those kinds of questions invite them to open up and share more.
It's about making them feel seen, heard, understood.
Which, let's be honest, is what we all crave in our relationships.
Absolutely. But let's be real. Becoming a better listener isn't always easy, especially when we're faced with viewpoints that challenge our own.
It's true. We all have our biases and triggers.
And sometimes it feels like our brains go into fight or flight mode when we hear something that contradicts our beliefs.
Yeah, we get defensive. We want to argue or shut down the conversation.
But Murphy reminds us that those moments of discomfort are actually opportunities for growth.
So instead of reacting defensively, try leaning into curiosity.
Okay, so instead of saying, that's ridiculous,
Yeah.
I could ask, why do you believe that?
Exactly. Or what experiences have led you to that conclusion?
It's about trying to understand where they're coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
Right. And remember, we don't have to abandon our own beliefs to truly listen to someone else.
In fact, that open-mindedness can actually strengthen our own convictions.
It's like that saying, iron sharpens iron. We need those different perspectives to challenge us and help us see the world more clearly.
So true. But, we can't always be on as listeners.
Right. We're human. We
You're
get
right.
tired. Our attention wanders.
Murphy even compares deep listening to the mental demands of air traffic controllers.
They need frequent breaks to avoid burnout.
So it's okay to acknowledge our own limits.
Absolutely. Listening is an active process, not passive absorption.
It takes energy.
Hmm.
And we need to be compassionate with ourselves.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to take a break.
How do you do that without being rude?
Honesty is key.
Huh.
It's okay to say, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed right now. Can we circle back to this later?
Or, I need a few minutes to process what you've shared. Can we
Yeah.
take a break?
Exactly. It's about setting healthy boundaries while still respecting the other person's need to be heard.
And it can actually lead to a more productive conversation later on.
It's also important to be aware of the situations and people that drain our listening energy.
Like, what topics do we tune out? Who do we get defensive with?
Those patterns can reveal a lot about our own biases and triggers.
Areas where we need to cultivate more patience and understanding.
Murphy put it perfectly. To be a good listener, properly attuned to what someone else is saying, you have to know yourself very well indeed.
That's so true. It's a journey of self-discovery as much as it is about. We've talked about why listening is so important, how to overcome those common roadblocks, but let's be real. In this world of constant distractions, actually becoming a better listener feels like a Herculean task.
It's true. We're bombarded with information from all sides. But the good news is that mindful listening is a skill, and like any skill, it can be honed with practice and intention.
So, where do we even start? Should we all go on a digital detox and retreat to a silent monastery?
Uh-huh. It doesn't have to be that drastic. Start with small, manageable steps. Try designating certain times as tech-free zones, like during meals or family time.
Yeah, creating those pockets of quiet can make a big difference. I've noticed that when I put my phone away during dinner, I'm actually more present and engaged with the people around me. But what about situations where we can't just turn off our devices, like at work or in social settings?
That's where the real challenge lies. Training ourselves to resist those distractions and stay anchored in the present moment. Think about it this way. Even experienced speakers need to be attuned to their audience. They read body language, gauge interest levels, and adjust their message accordingly.
So it's like we need to become active listeners on both sides of the conversation. As speakers and receivers, we need to pay attention to those subtle cues, those nonverbal signals that tell us how our message is landing.
That's right. And if you're ever unsure, don't hesitate to check in. A simple question like, am I making sense? Or is there anything you'd like me to clarify? Can go a long way in preventing misunderstandings.
It's like a reminder that listening is a collaboration, a two-way street. It's not just about waiting for our turn to speak, but actively working together to build understanding.
And sometimes the most powerful way to demonstrate that we're listening is through silence, resisting the urge to fill every pause with our own thoughts or opinions.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that Murphy talks about how, in some cultures, like in parts of Asia, silence is seen as a sign of respect and attentiveness.
Mhm.
But here in the West, we tend to get really uncomfortable with those pauses.
Yes. It's almost like we've forgotten how to appreciate the power of silence, but those pauses can be incredibly valuable. They create space for reflection, for processing, for allowing the other person to gather their thoughts.
It's like pressing the pause button on a movie to let a powerful scene sink in. We need those moments of quiet to fully appreciate the depth and nuance of what's being communicated.
Murphy even suggests a fascinating experiment. Try going an entire day without talking. She shares how the composer R. Murray Schafer would challenge his students to do this. They would often report feeling more attuned to the world around them, the subtle sounds, the rhythms of everyday life.
Wow, that's a pretty radical idea. But I can see how it could be transformative. It's like hitting the reset button on our auditory perception. It makes you wonder, what would we notice about the world and ourselves if we simply listened more deeply?
That's the real beauty of cultivating the art of listening. It's not just about acquiring a set of skills, it's about opening ourselves up to a richer, more meaningful experience of life.
It's about recognizing that the world is full of stories waiting to be heard. All we have to do is listen.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of listening. We hope this exploration has sparked your curiosity and given you some practical tools to become a more attentive and engaged listener.
Remember, true listening is a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing practice of cultivating presence, curiosity, and empathy. So keep those ears open, those minds curious, and keep listening.
Until next time.